In the spring of 1834, deep in the rolling hills of central Virginia, a discovery was made that would forever reshape how we understand the darkest depths of human evil. 47 children, ranging from 6 to 16 years old, found chained in the basement of what seemed to be an ordinary farmhouse. They bore no resemblance to one another. They spoke different languages. They came from different corners of the country, and yet, when questioned, every single one of them whispered the same name through their tears. Mother Sullivan. The local sheriff's report, buried for more than a century in the Henrico County archives, described scenes so disturbing that 3 of the investigating officers resigned within a week. What made this case truly haunting wasn't just the horror of what was uncovered, but the chilling truth that Constance Sullivan had been running her twisted enterprise for over 2 decades without ever being exposed. The children called her Mother, but the reality behind that title was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Before I continue with the story of the Sullivan family and their unspeakable secrets, let me ask you something. This channel isn't for everyone. It's for those willing to confront the darkest chapters of history, the stories most people would rather turn away from. If you've made it this far, you're not like most people. You know that some truths cannot be ignored, no matter how disturbing they may be. So hit that subscribe button and join our community of mystery seekers. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Do you dare to face the possibility that stories like this could exist in your own backyard? The question that haunted investigators in 1834 and continues to perplex historians today is simple. How could such a massive operation remain hidden for so long, especially in a small, close-knit rural community? Virginia at that time was a land caught between 2 worlds. The plantation system still ruled the social landscape, while whispers of industrial progress drifted down from the north. And in Henrico County, the small farming community of Millbrook, just 50 families scattered across gentle slopes, seemed like the very picture of quiet, rural life. Most residents farmed tobacco or corn. They traded at Henderson's general store. They gathered for socials at the one-room schoolhouse that doubled as a meeting hall. And on the edge of this community stood the Sullivan property, a modest 2-story wooden farmhouse surrounded by nearly 200 acres of farmland. To any traveler passing along the dusty road between Millbrook and Richmond, the place looked utterly ordinary. White clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, a red barn out back, a farm like any other. But what made the Sullivan property different was hidden far below. When Ezra Sullivan purchased the land in 1809, he invested heavily in expanding the basement. While most homes of that era had nothing more than root cellars, the Sullivan basement stretched far beyond the footprint of the house. Local craftsmen were hired for excavation projects throughout the 1810s and 1820s, but none ever saw the completed work. Ezra paid in cash and demanded secrecy, instructing workers to focus only on small sections. His young wife, Constance, arrived in Millbrook in 1811. Neighbors remembered her as a striking woman with dark hair, a soft voice, and a reputation for charity. She attended church when her health allowed, and often explained that she and Ezra were caring for several orphaned children from her family back in Pennsylvania. "It's only temporary," she said, "until suitable homes can be found." This story explained the occasional glimpse of children around the Sullivan property. Mrs. Henderson from the general store recalled seeing small faces peering out from the Sullivan wagon when Constance came to town for supplies. The children never spoke, but Constance assured everyone they were shy, traumatized, and simply needed time to adjust. Her explanation fit perfectly with the tragedies of the era. Orphan children were common in a world of disease and high mortality. The town accepted her word without question. Building the illusion. Constance became one of Thomas Henderson's most reliable customers. Every 2 weeks, she purchased large quantities of flour, pork, molasses, and medicine. When he remarked on the size of the orders for a couple with no children of their own, Constance gently reminded him of the orphans under her care. But neighbors noticed strange patterns. While most families worked sunrise to sunset, the Sullivans often kept lights burning into the night. The sounds of hammering or construction echoed across their fields at unusual hours. Ezra explained it away as improvements for the growing number of children. Even the local physician, Dr. Marcus Whitfield, was deceived. He visited the farm several times during the 1820s, but was never allowed to examine the children directly. Constance described their symptoms and collected the medicines, always explaining that the children were too frightened to see strangers. The deception was flawless. Even Reverend Samuel Matthews praised the Sullivans' Christian compassion when he visited. Constance would smile and say she was arranging permanent homes with relatives in Pennsylvania, but such things required patience. The truth, however, was far darker. The children were not orphans awaiting placement. They were prisoners, purchased, kidnapped, or lured from families across multiple states, and their suffering had been carefully concealed for more than 20 years. The first cracks, the unraveling began with a series of strange, almost unrelated incidents in the winter of 1834. A brutal February storm forced a traveling merchant, Jacob Stern, to seek shelter at the Sullivan farmhouse. That night, as he lay awake, he swore he could hear muffled crying beneath the floorboards. Ezra brushed it off as wind in the foundation, but Stern left the next morning unsettled. Weeks later, a young Irish immigrant named Mary Catherine Flynn vanished after arriving at the farm. Her family's desperate search was abandoned. She was presumed dead in the wilderness. Then on April 2nd, a farmer named William Hutchinson heard something that froze him in his tracks. Children screaming. Not playful shouts, but screams of raw terror. From behind a stand of oak trees, Hutchinson watched Ezra emerge from a cellar door, glance around nervously, and disappear underground. The whispers spread quickly through Millbrook, and for the first time, people began to question the Sullivans' story. Sheriff Benjamin Crawford dismissed it at first as gossip, but when Hutchinson filed a formal complaint, he had no choice but to investigate. On the morning of April 8, 1834, Crawford and his deputy arrived at the Sullivan farm expecting to put rumors to rest. What they uncovered instead would scar them for life and reveal one of the most horrifying secrets ever buried beneath American soil. Dr. Marcus Whitfield's testimony painted a picture even darker than investigators had imagined. He recalled how Constance Sullivan often asked precise medical questions, how to treat malnutrition, respiratory infections, and the common illnesses that plagued neglected children. She purchased sedatives in unusual amounts, along with other drugs that could be used to subdue the unruly. And then came the chilling realization. Constance hadn't simply been caring for orphans. She had been studying, systematically learning how to keep large numbers of children alive under conditions of deprivation. Every purchase, every inquiry, even the very design of the basement, had been calculated to maximize survival with the bare minimum of resources. The illusion of charity shattered. Thomas Henderson, the town's shopkeeper, provided yet another piece of the puzzle. His ledgers revealed a steady increase in bulk orders over the years: flour, pork, molasses, and medicine in quantities far too large for a household of two. At the time, it looked like generosity. In reality, it was evidence of a growing criminal empire. He even recalled special requests: blankets by the dozens, children's clothing in bulk, and medicines he normally sold only in small amounts. The investigation soon uncovered Ezra Sullivan's role as well. While Constance was the mastermind, Ezra acted as the enforcer. Survivors described him as the one who carried out punishments, who ensured obedience, who refined the basement not as a root cellar, but as a prison designed for human captivity. But the most horrifying revelation came from the records. Ledgers revealed that some children hadn't remained on the farm. They had been transferred elsewhere, sold into a wider network. Others were marked as unsuitable or problematic, cold words that corresponded with the small bodies later unearthed in the basement's hidden burial chamber. The scope of the crime expanded beyond Virginia. Authorities began linking the disappearances of children from Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Poor children, orphans, runaways, the kinds of victims least likely to be searched for or believed. For the first time, federal marshals were brought in to coordinate a multi-state investigation, something unheard of in the 1830s. The Sullivan case became one of the first criminal enterprises in America to cross state lines. And as more survivors began to speak, their stories were eerily consistent. They described years of imprisonment, routine abuse, and psychological manipulation so profound that some resisted rescue, believing the outside world was even more dangerous than captivity. New arrivals were broken down through isolation and punishment, forced into submission until they accepted their fate. A hierarchy had been created inside the basement, older children rewarded with scraps of privilege for keeping the younger ones under control. And through it all, Constance whispered poison into their minds. She told them their families had abandoned them, that they were worthless, that they deserved every lash, every hunger, every sleepless night. This was not care, it was conditioning. The network revealed. The trail of evidence revealed how the Sullivans had acquired their victims. Corrupt officials at poorhouses and orphanages sold children in exchange for payment. Criminal contacts in northern cities funneled runaways and street orphans into Constance's hands. Each new link exposed an enterprise that was expanding rapidly, with plans to establish similar facilities in other states. The discovery of the Sullivan farm had not uncovered the entirety of the crime. It had interrupted something much larger, a network on the verge of becoming an institution. The breakthrough came from a girl named Rebecca. 14 years old, pale, fragile, but unbroken. Unlike the others, she had not surrendered her defiance. She remembered everything. She had been kidnapped from her family's farm in Pennsylvania in 1829 when she was only 9 years old. She remembered the woman who arrived claiming to be a distant relative. She remembered the false promises of sweets and a ride to town. And she remembered waking up in chains beneath the Sullivan farmhouse. For years, Rebecca had listened. She recalled every visitor, every whispered conversation, every transaction. She remembered names, places, and even the dates when children were shipped away. Her testimony revealed the unthinkable. The Sullivans were only one link in a sprawling network. 2 weeks before the farm's discovery, Rebecca had been lined up with 3 other children before a wealthy visitor. The man inspected them like livestock, checking their teeth and bodies, dismissing them as too damaged for his purposes. When investigators searched Constance's papers, they found the letter he had left behind. It listed precise specifications, ages, temperaments, physical traits, all written in the cold language of commerce, and at the bottom, a name. H. Blackwood, Charleston, South Carolina. Henry Blackwood was no ordinary man. He was a wealthy plantation owner, respected, connected, and powerful. But beneath the polished surface, he had been purchasing children for years. Not for labor, not for service, for something far worse. The Blackwood connection opened a door investigators had not dared to imagine. The trafficking network was supplying children to some of the South's most powerful families. Children who could be worked to death, discarded, or used for purposes so unspeakable that even official reports refused to record them in detail. As the truth spread, so did the danger. Sheriff Crawford began receiving anonymous threats. Deputy Webb was ambushed by masked men on his way home. Dr. Whitfield's medical practice was boycotted by wealthy patients. And then, the most chilling blow, a survivor named Timothy, who had been providing critical testimony, vanished from protective custody. He was never seen again. The message was clear: silence or death. But the most devastating blow came when Constance Sullivan herself was found dead in her jail cell. The cause was listed as suicide. Few believed it. She had been scheduled to testify, to name names, to expose buyers, to reveal just how far the network reached. Her death silenced the investigation's most crucial witness. For a moment, it seemed the truth would remain buried, crushed under the weight of power and privilege. And then an unexpected voice broke the silence. Samuel Pierce, a former overseer on Henry Blackwood's plantation, Pierce had lived with the guilt of what he had seen for years. Now, unable to bear it any longer, he came forward. What he revealed shocked the federal grand jury in Richmond and forever cemented the Sullivan case as one of the darkest chapters in American history. Pierce described children arriving at Blackwood's estate in covered wagons. He spoke of hidden quarters in the outbuildings. He described evenings when wealthy men from Charleston and Savannah gathered behind closed doors, and the children were brought in like offerings. It was a revelation so horrifying that even hardened investigators struggled to record it. For generations, families in power had treated human beings as property. But this was something worse, a hidden market of innocence itself. Legacy of horror. The Sullivan case was never fully resolved. Records vanished, witnesses disappeared. Some powerful names were whispered but never confirmed. By the late 1830s, official investigations had been quietly shut down. But the scars remained. Survivors carried the trauma for the rest of their lives. Millbrook, once a quiet farming town, became a place people avoided, and the Sullivan farmhouse, its basement sealed with bricks and mortar, was left to rot. Today, only fragments of the story survive: old reports, hidden testimonies, newspaper clippings long forgotten, enough to remind us of what was uncovered, but never enough to reveal how deep the rot truly went. Closing. The Sullivan case stands as one of the darkest secrets buried beneath American soil. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that evil does not always appear in the shadows. Sometimes it wears the mask of kindness. Sometimes it hides behind a smile. And sometimes the most ordinary-looking farmhouse can conceal horrors beyond imagination. If you've stayed with me through this story, you're not like most people. You've faced the darkness most would turn away from. And that makes you part of a rare community, one that refuses to look away from the truth. So, if you found this story important, don't let it fade. Share it. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because there are more stories like this, buried, hidden, and waiting to be told. And remember this: history doesn't just live in books. It lives in the land beneath our feet, in the houses we pass by every day, in the whispers that refuse to die. Some truths may be buried, but they are never gone.